Jim had always found solace in the forest. After all the bloodshed, the noise, and the chaos of war, the silence here, among the towering trees and dense underbrush, was the closest thing to peace he'd known. Max, his loyal German shepherd, trotted at his side, his ears flicking as he sniffed the damp earth beneath him. It had been months since Jim had returned from his last deployment. Now, his life revolved around quiet walks in the woods and the routine of taking care of Max. But today, there was something about the forest that felt different. The wind was still, the birds silent, and an oppressive weight hung in the air. Max stopped suddenly, his body rigid. Jim barely had time to react before the dog let out a low growl. The sound sent a shiver down Jim's spine. Max was never the nervous type. He was the one who had kept Jim safe in countless dangerous situations. But now, something was off. Max's eyes locked onto something in the distance, something Jim couldn't see. "What's it, boy?" Jim muttered, his voice low, but Max didn't respond. The dog's focus remained fixed on the shadows ahead, his tail still and ears forward. Jim felt his pulse quicken. He'd been through enough to know that when Max reacted like this, it wasn't just his imagination. Something was wrong. Jim tugged gently on the leash. "Let's keep moving, Max. No time for games." But Max didn't budge. He growled louder this time, a deep guttural sound that made Jim's hair stand on end. Jim's instinct was to push forward, but something in the air told him not to. He hesitated, unsure. It was like the forest was holding its breath, waiting. The sound of Max's growl echoed through the trees, and Jim knew then they weren't alone. Jim's heart raced as he moved cautiously forward, Max's growls growing in intensity. He could feel the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The quiet of the forest had become unsettling. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves made him jump, his senses heightened. Max pulled hard on the leash, leading him into the depths of the forest, away from the familiar trail. Jim wasn't sure what he was expecting, but he knew this wasn't just some wild animal. There was something about the way Max was acting. It wasn't just instinct. It was as if the dog was trying to tell him something. As they walked deeper, the trees grew closer, their branches intertwined like fingers blocking out the light. The air was thick with the scent of damp leaves and earth. Jim's footsteps became muffled by the soft, wet ground beneath him, and the only sound was the soft rustle of Max's paws as he moved ahead, now pulling with urgency. They reached a small clearing in the woods, where the atmosphere grew colder. In the center of the clearing was a massive nest. Jim's breath caught in his throat. The nest was enormous, far larger than any animal's den. It was made of thick twigs, broken branches, and leaves, and it was perfectly round, with jagged edges that made it look both unnatural and crude. Max stood still, his body tense as he growled low in his throat, eyes fixed on the nest. Jim couldn't understand what he was seeing. The nest was so out of place. It didn't belong here. He could feel it. This was not just some random creation of nature. This was something far more sinister. "Max, what is it?" Jim whispered, his voice shaking slightly. His military training kicked in, and he knew that this wasn't the time for fear. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing on the edge of something dangerous, something dark. He took a cautious step closer, his eyes scanning the clearing. That's when he noticed the bones. Human bones. There, half buried in the earth near the edge of the nest, was a bone, its shape unmistakable. At first, Jim thought it might be a piece of debris, maybe a twisted branch. But as he knelt down and brushed the dirt away, his stomach turned. It wasn't wood. It was a bone, and it had teeth marks, as though something had chewed on it. "God, no," Jim murmured under his breath. He pushed himself up and backed away slowly, his heart racing in his chest. The bone wasn't the only one. More bones littered the ground, some fully exposed, others partially hidden under the dirt and leaves. They were human, too, large and small, old and fresh. Jim's mind raced. There was no logical explanation for what he was seeing. The bones weren't just discarded. They were deliberately placed, scattered around the nest in a pattern that felt deliberate. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Max let out a sharp bark, pulling on the leash as though he could sense something more. Jim turned to face the dog, who was now fixated on the trees beyond the clearing. The air was thick with tension. And then it happened. A figure emerged from the shadows. At first, Jim thought his mind was playing tricks on him. But as the figure stepped forward, the hairs on his neck stood on end. This wasn't just a person or an animal. This was something far worse. The creature was tall, taller than any human, and its form was massive, covered in strange, glistening scales. Its skin had a sickly green hue, and its eyes, if they could even be called eyes, were deep pools of darkness that seemed to absorb all light. It had an eerie, almost otherworldly presence, like something that didn't belong in this world. Max barked again, his body stiff, his fur bristling. Jim reached down, gripping the leash tighter, trying to pull Max back, but the dog was resolute, unwavering. Max wasn't afraid. He was ready to fight. The creature's gaze locked onto Jim, its unblinking eyes piercing through him. For a moment, everything stood still. Jim couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The creature took a slow step forward, and Jim's heart skipped a beat. It was as though the forest had come alive around him, closing in, trapping him in its grasp. Max growled, a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to reverberate in the very ground beneath them. Jim's mind raced. His training, his years in the military, nothing had prepared him for this. "Max, stay," Jim whispered, his voice trembling as he reached for his pocket, his fingers brushing the cool metal of his pocket knife. The creature didn't seem to acknowledge the dog's presence. It just kept moving closer, its eyes fixed on Jim. The growl of the dog seemed to agitate it, but it did not move quickly. Instead, it stepped with deliberate slowness, as if savoring the fear it was causing. Jim's pulse quickened. The creature was close now, too close. Max lunged forward, but Jim grabbed the leash just in time, pulling him back. The creature cocked its head slightly, as though confused by Max's aggression. Jim felt a sense of urgency, of impending doom. There was no way he could fight this creature. It was too large, too powerful. But there had to be a way to survive. There always was. Jim's mind raced as he thought through his options. The knife in his pocket wasn't enough. Max, though strong and brave, wouldn't be able to take down this thing on his own. They were outmatched, outclassed. The creature was too fast, too strong. Jim had to think, and he had to think fast. Max barked again, more aggressively this time, but the creature didn't respond with the same fear or hesitation that most predators would. It was as if it didn't even care about the dog's threats. Its attention remained on Jim. It wasn't attacking. It was observing, studying. That's when Jim realized. The creature wasn't just a mindless beast. It was intelligent. It had purpose. Then, without warning, the creature moved. Its long arms extended, reaching for Jim, its claws glistening in the dim light. Jim stumbled backward, narrowly avoiding the creature's grasp. Max growled and charged, but the creature swatted him away with ease, sending the dog crashing into a nearby tree. Jim's heart sank as he watched Max struggle to get back to his feet. The dog wasn't out for the count, but he was hurt, badly. "Max!" Jim shouted, his voice desperate. With no time to think, Jim turned and ran, pulling Max by the leash, hoping the creature wouldn't follow. He knew it was futile. The creature was faster, and it was gaining on them. The only chance they had was to make it out of the forest alive. The night was falling fast as Jim stumbled through the underbrush, Max limping behind him. His breath came in short gasps, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the creature's footsteps behind them, each step echoing in the silence. It wasn't just following. They were being hunted. Jim's mind raced, calculating his options. There was no escape, not with Max injured, not with the creature so close. The forest was dense, but it was no refuge. His only hope was to face whatever this was head-on. The clearing was still several yards away. Jim knew he couldn't outrun it. He couldn't outfight it. But there had to be something he could do. The creature's growl was growing louder, the sound vibrating in the air. Jim's only choice was to turn and face it. It was now or never. He spun around suddenly, the knife now gripped firmly in his hand. He faced the creature, his heart racing. Max stood beside him, still growling, but with less strength than before. The creature halted just a few feet away, its eyes locking with Jim's. There was no fear in its gaze, no hesitation. It was clear that this thing was a predator, and Jim was its prey. Jim held the knife before him, his hand shaking, but his voice steady. "I'm not afraid of you," he muttered, even though his heart screamed otherwise. Max growled one last time before lunging forward again, this time with all the remaining strength he had. The creature, distracted for a moment, shifted its focus, but that was all Jim needed. With a sudden burst of energy, he charged, using his military training to move with precision. He drove a knife into the creature's side. For a moment, there was silence. The creature staggered back, its body twisting in pain. It let out a deafening roar, one that echoed through the forest, shaking the ground beneath their feet. But it wasn't finished yet. Jim knew that if they were going to survive, they had to finish it. Together,